Hi biologists, let's start by looking at the learning objectives for this lesson. At the end of this section and following the biology syllabus, you should be able to describe the types of nutrition shown by bacteria. What does this actually mean? What are we trying to understand? Well, this is very straightforward. All you have to be able to do is to be able to describe the ways in which bacteria get their food. Let's look at nutrition in bacteria. Before we start, let's revise the definition of nutrition. This is a very important definition as it is also one of the characteristics of life. Nutrition is the way organisms get and use their food. The food supplies the energy and the chemicals that are needed for organisms to grow, carry out their chemical reactions, and survive. So nutrition is more than just eating. It is connected with the idea of how you get your food. When we look at nutrition in bacteria, there are two types. The two types of nutrition are autotrophic nutrition and heterotrophic nutrition. Though, depending on how you look at it, you could also argue that there are four types of nutrition, as autotrophic nutrition is subdivided into photosynthetic nutrition and chemosynthetic nutrition. And heterotrophic nutrition is subdivided into two types, saprophytic nutrition and parasitic nutrition. So, depending on how you look at it, as I've just said, you could say that there are two types of nutrition in bacteria, or there are four types of nutrition shown by bacteria. What we're going to do now is we're going to take each one of these types and discuss each one in turn. First of all, looking at autotrophic nutrition and looking at the word autotrophic, we see the word auto, which comes from the Greek word self, and trophic, which comes from the Greek word food. So autotrophic is self-food. In other words, it's making your own food. The definition of autotrophic nutrition is where organisms make their own food. It's rather like feeding without eating. Now, when we say that the organisms make their own food, we mean that they use chemicals and they produce food in their own cells. These chemicals are simple chemicals like water, for example, or nitrogen, or hydrogen sulfide. The energy needed to make their food will come from either the sunlight or from chemical reactions. Remember, autotrophic nutrition is subdivided into two types, photosynthetic and chemosynthetic. The two types of autotrophic nutrition, self-feeding, as we've just said, are photosynthetic and chemosynthetic. Photosynthetic nutrition is where the bacteria use energy from the sun to make their own food. In other words, they carry out photosynthesis. These bacteria can also be called producers because they are making their own food. These bacteria have chlorophyll, the green pigment, or other pigments. But remember, they don't have any chloroplasts because bacteria are prokaryotic organisms. That means they have no proper true nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. So therefore, they have no chloroplasts. An example of a photosynthetic bacteria would be purple sulfur bacteria. Chemosynthetic bacteria use energy from chemical reactions to make their own food. They use simple chemicals like nitrogen and iron. An interesting example here are iron-digesting bacteria that can be found down on the Titanic wreck. Iron-digesting or iron-oxidizing bacteria are gradually disintegrating the Titanic. Other chemosynthetic bacteria use nitrogen to make their own food. These nitrogen-fixing bacteria are very important bacteria in nature. They are able to take the atmospheric nitrogen and turn it into a useful form. In other words, they can convert atmospheric nitrogen into nitrates. These bacteria live in nodules, in hollows, like little caves, in the roots of clover plants. We will be meeting these bacteria again in our ecology section, and they form an important part of the nitrogen cycle as well. I'll fix you and make something useful out of you. The bacteria will take the nitrogen and form useful nitrates. Now remember, the other type of nutrition shown by bacteria is heterotrophic nutrition, and there are two subtypes of heterotrophic nutrition: saprophytic nutrition and parasitic nutrition. Heterotrophic nutrition, the word heterotroph coming from the Greek word other, food. So heterotrophic organisms cannot make their own food, they have to feed on others. Again, the definition of heterotrophic nutrition is very important, and heterotrophic nutrition is where organisms cannot make their own food. Their cells cannot produce food for the organism. The energy needed to make the food has to come from feeding on other plants or animals. In other words, they feed on others. Now, the two types of heterotrophic nutrition, as we've already said, are saprophytic and parasitic. Let's look at each of these in turn. Saprophytic bacteria get their food from dead organic matter. In other words, they feed on dead organisms. These organisms may be plants or animals. Basically, the saprophytic bacteria cause their food source to decay. Now, they play a very important role and would be known as consumers as well. And they play a very important role in nature because they are actually decomposers. They help mineral recycling because the bacteria of decay convert the minerals in their food source and release these minerals back into the ground. Parasitic bacteria get their food by living in or on another organism, causing it harm. An example of parasitic bacteria would be the disease-causing bacteria or pathogens, as they live in or on another organism and they cause it harm. An example of such a parasitic bacteria would be the bacteria known as Streptococcus, which gives rise to sore throats. So in summary, there are two main types of nutrition shown by bacteria. Autotrophic nutrition, where the bacteria make their own food, and there are two subtypes of autotrophic nutrition. A, photosynthetic, where the bacteria use sunlight to make their food, or chemosynthetic bacteria that use energy from chemical reactions to make food. The second type of nutrition is heterotrophic nutrition, where the organisms, or I should say the bacteria, can't make their own food. And there are two types of heterotrophic nutrition. There is saprophytic nutrition, where the bacteria feed on dead organisms, and parasitic nutrition, where the bacteria feed on living organisms. And there you have it. Practice in a jotter. Eat up the work. Now that we have reached the end of our lesson, have we achieved our objective? Can you describe the types of nutrition shown by bacteria?